So, Pastor Larry, there's one thing I've been curious is your just faith journey. How did you come to know Christ?
So I grew up in a Christian family and went to church from before I can remember, before my memories began to form. I was already in church and in the nursery, of course. And through that experience, our church was very evangelical, so there was the constant emphasis on giving your life to Christ, and so I can remember as young as 5 years old asking Jesus to come into my heart, and went through an experience that I think a lot of young people go through who grow up in church, and that is did this take? Is this real? Am I really saved? And so I can recall different times as I grew older, again asking Jesus into my heart because I wasn't sure. But then when I got into high school, my life was heavily impacted by the high school Sunday school teacher that I had. And this actually brings up a side note that in the church I grew up in, we didn't have retreats. We had evangelistic meetings that would be held for probably 4 or 5 days, or revival meetings that we held for 4 or 5 days, once or twice a year. That was the closest thing we had to a retreat. We didn't have some place that we went to. So we didn't have that kind of spiritual experience, I guess you could say, in our church in my growing up years. So one of the big impactors for me was this high school Sunday school teacher, and it was a result of I think the way the Lord was working in my life at that time, plus the way that He communicated the gospel, that really began to open my eyes to the grace of God, and how much we are just dependent on Him to save us, and it's not about us, it's about Him. And I finally came to a place where I had a pretty powerful encounter with God, in which I realized that it wasn't just me calling out to God for salvation. God was actually calling me to Himself. He was calling me His child, and that was a life changer for me. It got rid of the doubts and really excited me about following Christ and serving Him. I think another thing that's interesting to me in our church is Alaska's a very different place than the East Coast. Here there's a lot of emphasis on going to college and getting a career. The people that I grew up with, they were entrepreneurs. They were small business owners. A lot of them were fishermen. And then there were those who basically gave their life to the ministry of the gospel. They served in a local Bible school that was affiliated with our church, and they taught for 6 months out of the year. They were not paid. It was what used to be called basically faith ministry, where you went and you ministered without being guaranteed a salary. They were supported by people from the church. They worked part-time jobs. And these were people who gave their life to the work of the ministry without any kind of a guarantee of income. And that example of faith, I think, made a big difference for me in my growing up years.
Such a great testimony.